Hey guys, I have a Thursday episode for you, and my guest today is Sara B Larson, who is the author of the Defy trilogy, The Dark Breaks the Dawn duology, and Sisters of Shadow and Light, and the sequel to Sisters of Shadow and Light, Warriors of Wing and Flame, which came out this week. She tells us a little bit about the book and shares her journey through the publishing industry and how she landed her first agent, her second agent, and her book deals. And she gives some really good tips about the querying process, about, how to handle like the stress of writing and living and just being a human being. And I think you guys are really going to enjoy getting to know her. Sara, can you tell me a little bit about your novel that is coming out, Warriors of Wing and Flame?
Yes, I'd be happy to. Of course, I can't share too much since it's a sequel, and in case people haven't read the first book, I don't want to spoil things. But basically, this is the continuation of my two sisters that are the main characters in Sisters of Shadow and Light. Their names are Zura and Anara, and it's the continuation of their story. Some pretty heavy, hard stuff went down at the end of Sisters of Shadow and Light, so when we start up with Warriors, it's right immediately after those events, and we get to follow the sisters navigating the kind of massive changes that just happened in their lives that I don't want to spoil if you haven't read it, but there's some pretty big changes that happened to both of them, and there are also some pretty devastating things that happen. So there's actually quite a strong theme of dealing with anxiety and panic attacks throughout this book. In a fantasy setting, so I can't necessarily use like all our modern terminology, but I'm hoping that will kind of shine through, and the readers will recognize that these sisters are dealing with that and trying to find ways to cope and handle it. And then intermixed with all of that, we have the magical paladin warriors are there, and they're like falling in love and trying to figure out what that means and trying to navigate the changes in their sisterly relationship, which is a main theme within these books, because I have 4 little sisters and I always want to write a book about sisters. And then there's the griffins and all the things and magic, fighting, and there's a little death too. So that hopefully is kind of a non-spoilery teaser into what the book is about.
Yes, I think you did that perfectly. I love to, you're mixing like things that the readers themselves could relate to in their own lives, but in a fictional magical world, which is so great. I mean, I think everybody deals with anxiety in some way or another on, a minor scale or a major scale. Yeah. So, I mean, having, just reading about, that is going to be helpful for people out there, I am sure.
Yeah, I think it is actually pretty widespread these days, and especially since, COVID happened. Yes. I think lots of people are dealing with anxiety that maybe never have before, so I think it is definitely out there.
Yes, I definitely think you are right with that one. Well, Warriors of Wing and Flame is going to be your 7th published book, right?
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about your journey through publishing, having, 6 other books come out, and kind of how that all happened for you.
Oh, boy. And I always say I'm the worst at telling short stories, and that's why I write books. Because I'm so bad.
We have time.
At telling stories. Like, oh, wait, but then this happened, and then this happened.
Right.
Okay, so it all started when I was like 3 years old. No, I'm just kidding. No, I really have written my whole life. And so when people say, when did you start writing, or what inspired you to write a book, I can't pinpoint like one moment in time where I thought, oh, I want to be a writer, or, oh, I want to get published. It's just been a part of me my whole life. I have, in my bio, it talks about my Little Mermaid notebook, and that bio has kind of evolved over the years. So if you read it in Defy up to, Warriors, it's changed a little bit. But I talk about that because it literally is the notebook that I wrote my first stories in when I was in 2nd and 3rd grade. And they weren't just like, Bunny went to the farm or something. It was, I don't even know what that was, but I wrote like weird, like legit books for a 2nd grader about like a girl whose mom is pregnant and has a premature baby, and the baby's in the NICU, and they were like 3 and 4 chapters long, which I feel like for an 8-year-old is pretty prolific. So,
yes.
So I really have written my whole life, and I actually used to dream of being published when I was a teenager, I used to think, wouldn't it be amazing if I were the youngest person to ever get published?
Mm-hmm.
I had no clue how to do it, though. And there was no real internet back then. I mean, that's how old I am. I'm dating myself here. But, like, the internet was new. When I was in middle school and high school, like, it was, like, MySpace was the thing, you know, when I was in high school, I guess. And I never even did it because I'm like, what? I don't know. So you couldn't, like, just go Google things and be like, how do I get published? You know, I just had no clue. And so I didn't do anything about it. I'd write books and I'd share it with my sisters and a couple of my close friends, and then I'd move on to write the next one. But it wasn't until I actually got married, and this is actually funny because when I went to college, I went to school to become a nurse. I wanted to get a major in creative writing or something, but my mom told me I needed to get a degree in something that was marketable, that I could get a job with if my husband ever died, because he's very fatalistic that way. So I went to nursing school, and I had no time to write books. I barely even had time to read books. Like, I would read in my breaks in between semesters because I just couldn't really find time during it. So when we got married, my husband, I hadn't written a book in a couple of years, and it's the weirdest thing. It didn't even occur to me to tell him that I was a writer. Like, he knew I was a reader, because I would read a lot of books, and I was still, you know, I went to, like, midnight Harry Potter book launches, so he was pretty aware that I liked books, but he had no clue. So when I had my first son, he was about your child's age. He's about 8, 9, 10 months old, somewhere in there, and we had a lesson in our church that was talking about supporting your wife in their dreams and stuff, and we came home from that lesson, and he said, is there anything that you wish you were doing that you're not doing that I could help support you in? And I sat there for a second, and it just hit me like, excuse the pun, but like a ton of books. I was just like, I miss writing. I used to write books, and I haven't written a book in like 4 years, and I really miss it. And he just sat there flabbergasted, like, excuse me, come again? Like, what? What do you mean you used to write books? And I'm like, well, I used to write books. Like, before I met you, and well, before college, to be fair, I wrote all these books. And so he was very sweet, and he said, well, then let me take, our son's name is Brad, so let me take Brad for the afternoon, and you can write a book, which was so sweet and supportive of him, and so incredibly misguided.
Yeah.
And he had no idea what he was getting himself into.
No.
When he said, all right, I'll support you in this desire to write books. But to his credit, he has always been my biggest supporter and cheerleader, and so, yeah, my son was born in 2005, so this was 2006, and my first published book came out in 2014. So,
yeah,
as I said, it's a long story how I got from that point to published, but to shorten it down immensely, I decided to write a book that I thought was going to be the next big thing because it was Twilight meets Harry Potter.
Ooh.
So it was going to be amazing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But strangely, although I did get requests from agents on that book, I did not get an agent with it, and I couldn't let it go for like 2.5 years. Like, I just kept revising that book, and then like wrote the sequel and all the things you're not supposed to do. I did. So I finally moved on, gave up, wrote a new book, and I did get an agent with that book, and I was with that agent for 2 years. And it's interesting because when you're searching for agents, you want so badly to be represented, and you feel like you're just trying to claw your way into this world where the gatekeepers are just like trying to like throw fire darts at you to keep you out or something. And so, you know, when somebody finally says yes, I was so excited and so naive that I didn't even hardly ask her about her style of agency. I was just like, somebody loves my book and wants to represent me. The answer is yes. And she was a super nice person, but professionally, our work, the way we worked didn't work out, if that makes sense.
Definitely, yeah.
I worked really fast, and she was much more methodical and very slow, and was slow to get a hold of, and just a lot of things that just really stressed me out and made it really hard. And then ultimately, you know, she never sold a book. And I even had a book go to auction and still fail.
Wow.
Which is a whole story in and of itself, which would take a long time to explain, but some crazy stuff went down that was a little heartbreaking. And I finally eventually decided that I needed to part ways with her and try and search for an agent again, which was so hard to do because I was like, it took me so long to get the first one. What if I never get another one? But that is during the time when my cousin's husband had cancer. And if any of you or your listeners are familiar with the story behind Defy, which was my first published book, I started writing Defy shortly after he passed away from cancer, and that's why the book is partially dedicated to him. His name was Josh, and it's because I was in this moment where I'm like, I'm leaving my agent, I need to be writing a new book because I can't query with the book that she had out on submission, and my cousin's husband, he was only 24, had just died of cancer, and I'd sit down at the computer and try and write something, and I couldn't write anything, like nothing would come out. And one of my good author friends told me to stop trying to write a book and just write what I was feeling. And so I wrote a death scene. And that was the very first thing I wrote of Defy. And so from there, I just started asking questions about these characters and why they were in the jungle and why this girl was pretending to be a boy and protecting a prince that she hated and chasing assassins. And from there, this whole, story and world came out. And the interesting thing is that I actually only wrote about 30 pages of it, and then I had a different idea, and I decided to pursue the different idea, and I set Defy aside. And I wrote this other book, and I queried it, and I got a lot of interest, but I did not get any bites, ultimately, like no offers of representation. And then I actually wrote another book in the meantime. So at least at this point, I had gotten really good at, as soon as I start querying one book, I start writing another one.
Yes.
So that I always had something to work on. And that one, and it always gives you that, like, little bit of hope. Like, well, if this one doesn't work, at least I have the new one, right? So I was doing that, and so I actually made it through 2 books and got so close and had fulls requested and had agents love it, but just like, it's just something not quite, I don't know, it's just not clicking. And I got to this point where I was like, I just don't know if I can do this. Like, I had an agent, I left my agent, I've written 2 books, I get so close, I was pretty downtrodden. And that's the point when I came back to Defy. And I had reached kind of a roadblock with that book, and it's because I didn't know Damien yet, the prince in that book. I didn't understand what his character was yet. When I wrote those first 30 pages, I believed that he was an antagonist. And so it wasn't until I realized who he really was and the secret he was keeping, which makes me sound crazy, but whatever.
No, it doesn't. It makes perfect sense what you're saying.
He revealed his secrets to me finally, and then everything clicked into place, and I finished drafting that book in 2 weeks.
Wow.
And yeah, it came out fast once I finally unlocked what was happening. But I still was just super depressed, and all my confidence was gone, and I really almost didn't even query that book. And it's interesting because my husband said, you need to have somebody fresh take a look at this. And you might have heard of the author Catherine Purdy. Mm-hmm. But she is my best writing friend, my best friend, and she is the one that I hardly knew her at that point. I'd known her a little bit, and I just had this thought come to me, you should call Catherine Purdy, well, she was like Katie, and ask her if she'll be willing to read your book. And so I did, and I'm like, I know you don't know me very well, and this is really weird, but would you mind reading this book for me and critiquing it for me? And thankfully, she said yes. And it was her praise that she came back to me and said, this book is so amazing. I love it. It's my second favorite book I've ever read, because her first favorite was Shadow and Bone, and who can compete with that?
Yeah.
But she said, this is amazing, you have to query it. So she's kind of the one that gave me the courage to do it. And I sent out my queries on a Monday afternoon, and I got a full request within 2 hours. And the next day, on Tuesday at noon, I got a call from the agent offering to represent me. My
goodness. What a journey.
It was insane to go from how hard it had been for literally 7 years at this point to, in 24 hours, having an offer on the table. And I had only queried 10 agents because I was, I did it in little batches. And then so I had only queried 10 agents, and I had to tell them, I know I just barely sent you this query yesterday, but I already have an offer. And I actually ended up getting more than one offer, and that's how I ended up with Josh at Adams Literary. And he had me just do some super quick, just a couple little line edits basically was all, and then he sent it out, and we got the offer from Scholastic about a month later. So, And they said to me, you can either get published in 11 months if you think you can edit this book fast enough, or it will be in 2 years. And I said, I will do whatever it takes.
Yes.
So it came out in 11 months. So there you go. That was actually the fast version, believe it or not.
I mean, I love this question, and I love hearing the answers to it, because it always rings true to me that, like, you know, it all happens the way it's supposed to happen, right? Like, I think that Defy and that idea came to you in that moment, and you needed to write those pages to, like, get the pot stirring in your head. But I think, you know, maybe you needed to write those 2 other books and, like, learn a little bit more about yourself and yourself as a writer before you could draft Defy in 2 weeks, which is, like, ridiculous. So
I used to be a really fast writer. I am not that fast anymore, unfortunately. I wish I were, because it'd make my life a lot easier.
Right? I wish I had the time to devote just, like, a whole 2 weeks to it. I think I could probably do it, but I have, like, 12 billion other things to do.
I know. It just keeps getting busier and busier, too. I hate to break it to you.
Another point that I love in your story that I think is really important is the first literary agent you had. I think, you know, you mentioned how we're grasping to get a literary agent, and, like, I feel like there's a feeling like, oh, once you get a literary agent, like, you've made it. It's done. Like, you've achieved the goal of what you need to, and that can make people really eager to say yes to anybody who offers them representation. But it's so important to really get to know the agent. And, you know, as I've talked to a bunch of different literary agents, like, you should be interviewing them on the call as much as they're, you know, trying to learn about you as well, so that you don't end up, you know, I'm not saying anything bad about you at all. I'm just saying, like, it's a good learning experience, I'm sure, for you, because it helped you realize, like, oh, okay, now I really do need to ask some questions to this person who, you know, has to help me through the rest of the process.
Yeah, definitely the second time around, I had a lot more questions for the agents when I talked to them on the phone than the first time.
Yeah.
The first time I just kind of answered her questions and was just like, where do I sign, you know?
Right.
And I was naive, and the thing is, too, is that even if I had known the questions to ask her or had thought to ask them, she may not have answered them super honestly, or she maybe thought in her mind that her answers would have been honest, but working with her over time, I would have realized, like, this isn't working. Like, you know, sometimes it's actually more common than you think that authors don't stay with their first agent. Yeah. Because it is a professional relationship, and not everybody works well together, you know? I mean, different people have different styles of how they communicate and how they work and how, you know, editorial they are and all those things. And so all of that has to kind of line up and mesh. And, you know, ultimately they have to be able to sell your book, too. So that was kind of the biggest downfall. Like, I could have probably dealt with her being slow and not responding and stuff if she had sold a book. But in the end, I'm actually very glad that that didn't happen, because you know, Josh and I work so much better together. We're both much faster. And if I email him, he responds back within, like, you know, usually like 15 minutes, but at the most it's like a couple hours unless something really crazy is happening in his life. So, you know, that just works a lot better for me, because I tend to be I need to do it now. I need to make a plan. I need to do this fast, because I only have this limited time to do these things, and I can't wait for a month to hear from you, because then my whole life has changed by then. So
Definitely. And I think, you know, to your point, you know, sometimes you do have to maybe just experience that person as your agent and as your, you know, your what is kind of like a business partner in that sense, to really to understand them and know them. If, you know, because like you said, she probably might not have been totally honest or upfront about, you know, her style and all of that. So there's so much that goes into it.
Like I said, you know, she might have believed that she responds faster than she does. I don't know. But for me, it was very frustrating to have her be so slow. And other authors are fine with it. Like, it doesn't bother them if their agents take a while to get back to them. So it just very much comes down to your professional working style and your personalities. So
yeah. Well, I just think that's a good point for people to understand, maybe those who are, you know, newer into looking into querying and finding an agent. So
yeah, definitely. When you get to the point where you get an offer, you need to be interviewing them and making sure that this is, you know, as much as you're capable of figuring out through a phone call if it's going to be a good fit.
Right. Well, tell me, I mean, do you have any tips, or like one tip that you could share with writers who are in the querying process right now? You know, maybe besides what we just said of, like, make sure to interview the agent when you're on the call with them, but, you know, any tips about actually querying that you could share from your experience?
I mean, I guess it depends on if you want specific to actually like sending a query letter or just the whole process of querying.
Let's do the whole process.
Okay, so my number one piece of advice would be what I learned that took me years to learn, that I made terrible mistakes at the beginning, which is that every time, which I kind of touched on this briefly, but to reiterate it, is that every time you start querying a book, you should be working on a new book.
Yes.
Because there's nothing worse than being in the middle of those query trenches or query purgatory or whatever you want to call it. Like, we used to call it query hell, and then submission purgatory. Once you get an agent and then you're on submission editors, like, it just keeps, like, it doesn't end. Like, the hard stuff just keeps happening, but it's fine. We can just, we won't worry about that.
Right.
But the important thing is to always have something new that you're working on, because otherwise, every time you get that rejection, it just feels like a scab to the heart. It just feels like, oh my gosh, I just lost another chance at getting published, and I don't know if it's going to happen, and you just start spiraling, right? But if you have a new project that you're excited about, that you're working on, that's what I was saying, is like I got to the point where I was really good at that I made sure I had something new that I was working on, because then when I got those rejections, I thought, okay, that one wasn't a good fit for that agent, but I have this new one. So if this one doesn't fit an agent, I'm really excited about this one, and I can re-query that agent with this new one when it's ready. And it kind of just keeps letting you be in a place of hope instead of being in a place of just total despair as the rejections roll in, because they always do. I mean, even with Defy and how quickly I got an agent and, you know, getting an offer within 24 hours, I still had people reject that. You know, I still had other agents say, oh, well, I'm not that interested. Like, it sounded good, but if I have to rush, then I don't want to read it. You know? So, like, even then, it was like I still got a couple rejections, and at that point, you're like, well, whatever, you're lost, you know? But if you have something that you're working on, then it just always gives you that hope to cling to, that, like, this isn't the end for me, and there's always another project. So that would be my biggest advice. Yeah,
I think that's such awesome advice. And whether you're, you know, I think that after sending a query, your empty email inbox can be terrifying and be like a stab in the heart, and the rejections too. So yeah, distract yourself with writing a new project or something else completely, right? Like pick up a new hobby, you know, paint, read, just do something so that you're not just sitting there staring, thinking about whether or not you're going to get a response.
Turn off your email.
Yes,
for sure.
Turn off your email.
Refresh, because nothing will drive you to insanity faster than that.
Yes, that is the worst. Well, my next question, I'd love to know your favorite part and your least favorite part of the publishing journey.
Well, I think my favorite part would definitely be when I hear from readers that my books have touched their lives in some way, or that they, you know, when I get a reader that writes me or comes up to me at a conference or something and says that your books are my favorite books, I've read them 10 times, or, you know, like, I'm in love with Damien, or I just am obsessed with Lorcan, or, oh my gosh, Raisin's my new book boyfriend, and that just makes me so happy, because I'm like, oh, I'm so glad you're my people.
Yes.
You know, because, like, that makes me so happy. And I've had people also talk to me, I mean, some poignant stuff too, like, I've had women write me, or girls, that have scarring from fires or other tragic events, that have said that reading about Alexa has made them feel like they can still be beautiful even with their scars, because she does get scarred at the end of Defy and deals with that throughout the series. And you know, there's some really amazing things that have come, and it just really hit you that, like, my book is on shelves that strangers pick it up and read it, and it impacts their lives. That is the coolest thing. The hardest thing would be to continue trying to get published. My least favorite thing is that just because you've sold one book doesn't mean that you're going to sell another. And if anything, it just keeps getting harder and harder and harder. The industry is getting harder. They're really, I mean, every year it feels like they're buying less books already, even before COVID. And then now with COVID, it's just like total upheaval. And it's just, there's no guarantees. And that makes it a really hard career to, you know, rely on in any way, because even my friends that are massive bestsellers, you know, if their next book doesn't sell as well, then they have a hard time even, like, trying to get publishers to say yes again and stuff. Like, there's just no guarantees in it, and that is the hardest part about publishing. So, you just have to really, really love writing and be willing to deal with all the emotional upheaval that comes with you having it be a career. Because it's definitely not one of those things where it's like, if you do X, Y, and Z, then you're going to get this result, and you're going to move up this corporate ladder, and you're going to get these promotions, and there's no guarantees with it. So it can be kind of stressful that way.
Yeah, there's not a straight line path to, okay, here you go, you write a book and it becomes a New York Times bestseller, and so does every book after that you write. There's no 1, 2, 3 step of how to do that and how to maintain it.
There's no rhyme or reason to it sometimes.
No.
So it's kind of frustrating. I come from a background of, like, my dad's an entrepreneur, my husband's an entrepreneur. Like, I have this brain that's wired to, if you put in this work and if you do these things and you get results, and publishing isn't like that. You can put in all the work and all the effort and make amazing, incredible stories and still have it not work. So that can be hard.
That is so frustrating. And, kind of calling back to, like, the query hell or query trenches, whatever we want to call it, can, like, I think part of the frustration with querying is that too, like, your book could actually be incredible and your query is incredible, right? But sometimes it's what agent looks at your query on what day and what other things they have in their inbox that they're comparing it to, maybe that they've read, and it's all kind of like the luck of the draw, unfortunately.
It really is. And that's really a hard thing to deal with in publishing, is that so much of it is timing. And obviously you have to have the skill. I don't even like to call it talent, because I feel like anybody who really wants to be a writer can learn the skills of being a good writer. It might come more naturally to some people, and some people might have to work a lot harder at it, but anybody who wants to be a good writer can write an excellent story with the right training, with learning the right skills, all that kind of stuff. But it is so much about timing, because it's just like you said, like, you could have sent a query to an agent, and if you would have sent it on a different day, it would have hit them completely differently.
Yeah.
But because of whatever happened in their life that day, it didn't hit them right. There's just so much personal things that go into reading a book. And that's part of what makes it so wonderful, but also really hard. Because that's why, that's how an editor will decide that they love it and are obsessed and want to offer, but it's also the reason why they might reject it, because for whatever reason, it just wasn't the fit that day.
Yeah, and isn't that just maddening to think about a little bit? Sarah, my next question for you. I'd love to know about your writing style. Are you more of a pantser, a planner, or do you fall somewhere in between?
So I'm definitely in between, and it really varies from book to book. Some of my books, like I was talking about with Defy, came from I just wrote a theme, and then I had to ask a bunch of questions, so that, I did not plot it before I wrote it. But after I had written those first, 20 or 30 pages and then got stuck, I had to plot the rest of it. And that's when I figured out, what Damien was really doing. Damon, my friend's son is named Damon. I was talking to her all morning, so I just got confused. But anyway, Damien, Prince Damien, I had to figure out what he was hiding and what his skill was. And then that kind of forced me to figure out the whole plot of all 3 books and the world that they were living in and all the backstory and all that stuff. So I started off pantsing that one for a week, and then I plotted it, and then I finished it. So it kind of depends. Sometimes I come up with an idea for a book first, and so then I write down kind of major plot points, and then flesh it out as I go or whatnot. But it just kind of depends on the story and where the story comes from and how I start it. But I am definitely not a full-on plotter, that's for sure. And Katie, my friend, like I was talking about Catherine Prairie, she will attest to that vehemently, because she is such a researcher / plotter. Like, it takes her months to do pre-writing stuff before she writes. Ooh. And I'm just like, how can you do that?
Yeah.
Like, once I have an idea, I want to get through the pre-stuff as fast as possible so that I can start writing the book before I lose my momentum with the idea.
Yes.
I want to get it out while I'm excited and while I have this momentum before my internal editor can start attacking it and make me go, maybe I shouldn't write this book for this reason or whatever. Because my internal editor has gotten progressively more horrible to me as the years have gone on, and it's made it harder and harder for me to draft a book. So I kind of have to, somehow trick it into being, shutting it up so that I can actually get a book out these days. So I'm like, the faster I can get into the drafting phase, the better. Otherwise, I'll end up psyching myself out and I won't write the book.
Yes. That's important. We don't want that to happen. I love the point you made earlier about how you had to wait for Damien to, like, tell you all the secrets he was hiding and all of that, and how you made a mention, like, oh, that might make me sound crazy, but I think other writers totally understand that. I think people who aren't writers don't. Like, I remember telling my husband, like, oh, yeah, my character, like, decided to do this, and, like, it changed the whole story, and blah, blah. He's like, your character doesn't decide anything. Like, you tell your character what to do. I'm like, I'm sorry, that's not how it works all the time. Like, they're definitely telling me what they want to do most days.
Lucas did that to me in this series, in Sisters of Shadow and Light, and, well, I mean, more so in Warriors. He decided that he wanted, things happened a little differently with him than I expected, but I was so thrilled with the way it turned out, and he became one of my favorite characters to write in this book, so.
The ones that do that usually end up being the favorites. They do something a little unexpected.
Yep, it's true.
Well, my next thing that I'd love for you to share is something that your readers wouldn't know about you.
I was trying to think about this because it depends on if they follow me on Instagram or not, I guess, because I tend to share bits and pieces of my personal life on Instagram, and so I try to share things that I think are interesting, so that tends to be the things that, like, maybe people wouldn't know about me, I don't know, but so I was like, what is something that maybe they don't know? And I thought, well, I guess I could share that I love animals, and I love experiences with animals. Like, I dream of going on a safari someday. But one thing I have been able to do that I've always wanted to do is I got to swim with sharks in the ocean, like an open snorkel with black tip reef sharks. That was very cool.
That is so cool.
Yeah, and I really hope to someday be able to do a cage dive with great whites. So, and when I was younger, I used to dream of being an orca trainer at SeaWorld before I knew that apparently that was not a good thing that they do. But
no.
I wanted to just because I love the orcas so much, and I thought that would be the coolest thing ever to, like, ride on an orca's back. You know, how cool would that be?
So cool.
I've done, like, the dolphin excursions a couple of times where you get to swim with the dolphins and ride on their backs. But it's just not quite the same as an orca. You know, I mean, it's still really cool. But yeah.
Just the difference in size there.
Yeah, a little different there.
That is
so I definitely have, like, a real affinity for animals, and definitely, like, large animals and kind of the wild ones, so.
Oh, I would never, I think sharks and, orcas are, like, amazing creatures, but I could never swim with sharks. Like, I'm too terrified. Like, I can't even swim in a swimming pool by myself because I'm afraid, I know it's not possible, but that there could be a shark in the water.
That's funny. Yeah, no, I don't have too much fear of sharks, so, we were, it was a little sketchy, like, they would drop a metal enclosed bucket of chum way down deep under the boat, and that's how they get the sharks to come. And I'm like, that's not very safe, but whatever, I'll still get in the water. So I did. And it was really funny. My husband and I were the first ones to get out because I was like, I don't care, I'll get in the water. Everybody else was kind of scared. And they had like a rope that you were supposed to hold on to and, like, have your body float. And they said, don't make sudden movements and all these things. And so all the other people on the boat that were doing it kind of very slowly came out, and they were there, and one of the sharks started swimming up below our feet. Ooh. And then there was another one that was out further out, but it came up higher, and it was starting to swim towards us. So my husband and I were watching that shark because he had, like, a hook in his mouth, and he looked kind of mean. Ooh. So we were keeping an eye on him, and the next thing we know, we look, and every other person has gotten back on the boat because they're so scared. And we're the only ones out there, and we're out, like, way far from the boat at the very end of this rope, just floating out there with the sharks. So
that's incredible. Well, good on you for being so brave.
I guess. Good on me or stupid of me, I'm not sure which. But they're only reef sharks. I mean, even if they decided to try to attack, they'd get a chunk out of you, but they wouldn't kill you. So. Well,
and you're here today, and you have all your parts. So I think it's brave. I think it's brave.
Yeah, nothing happened. It's all good.
Oh, good. I hope you get to do a cage dive, because I've seen videos of Emily R. King doing that, and it looks crazy and awesome.
Yeah, so she's actually a good friend of mine, and she invited me to go with her on that, and I wanted to so badly, but I wasn't in a place that I could do it with her, so we're hoping that one of these years I'll be able to go with.
Yes, I hope you get to do that for, your love of scary large animals.
I mean, like, can you imagine though? I mean, you're totally safe in a cage.
Yeah.
So it would be like the biggest rush to have this 16
It
foot
would.
great white right there. Like, it'd be so cool.
I did a virtual reality thing once at a friend's house, and it was like you were going down in a cage into like this deep dark hole, like you had to gather something. It was like some like you were like a marine biologist or something. You were doing something in the ocean, but then the shark comes at your cage and like, you know, starts to attack it and all that stuff. So that's kind of what I think of when I think of cage diving. Although I imagine that they're like really well secured so that sort of thing wouldn't happen.
Yeah, I think they're pretty safe.
Oh, good.
So, as long as you go with a reputable company, I
yes.
guess, you know, like don't go out with the fisherman that's like, oh yeah, this old thing, it'll be fine.
Right, it's all rusted.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
My next question, I would love to know, on a typical day, how much time you spend writing.
So this has changed a lot over the years. Before I got published, and even the first couple years after I got published, I was very strict about writing every single day. Like, it was just a rule that I had that I always wrote every day, and I would write for at least an hour every day. As I've gotten deeper into the industry and into my career, and as my children have grown, my husband travels for work, and I have a sophomore in high school all the way down to a 3-year-old toddler. So I literally never sleep because somebody is always awake. Like, I just don't sleep anymore. Like, you know, your high schooler wants to stay up till midnight to be with friends, and then he wants to come in and talk to you until 1 a.m, which I'm so glad he wants to talk to me.
Right.
There's that. But then he finally goes to bed, and then the 3-year-old is, like, making noise at 2 a.m., and then she comes in the room at 5 a.m. And, you know, like, all these hours that I used to have to be able to write, I don't have anymore. I used to be so good at, my kids went to bed at 8 or 8:30, and I would write from 8:30 till 10 or 11 or 12 or however I felt that night, you know, knowing that I'd probably get to sleep till 6 or 7 in the morning, and, you know, and then I'd have nap time, too. So now I have, you know, this high schooler, and I have 2 elementary school kids, and then the toddler, and so somebody always needs me now. And I'm a chauffeur.
Mm-hmm.
Like, half of my life is in my car, and I try to bring my computer with me. But even then, like, when they were littler, I could do that. If I had to drive them to a lesson, I could sit in the car and write. But now it's like I have to take my son to basketball, but I can't just sit there and write on my computer because then I have to go pick up my niece and then my daughter and take them to dance, and then I have to somehow get my son to soccer at the same time, but it's 10 minutes away from dance. And you know what I'm saying? Like, everybody has stuff at the same time, and so I'm literally just running like a crazy person from morning until night. And so trying to find time to write now is so hard, and I think that's part of why I'm not very prolific at writing anymore. There's no consistent time to do it, and so it's really more about just like when push comes to shove and I get like desperate down to deadlines, or I have to sell something, so I have to have a partial or something, then it's like, okay, mommy's disappearing for, you know, Saturday night to go write for 4 hours because the only time I can find the whole week to do it. So it's a lot harder these days, I'm not going to lie, but it is one of those things that if it's important, if it's something, you know, or if you have to do it because it's your job, then you make it work, right? Like, if I have to, if it gets bad enough, I have to start hiring people or begging family if I can't afford to hire somebody to start driving my kids places or to help me so that I can at least try and squeeze in an hour or two of writing every day, and then just pray that I can maximize and get as many words done as possible in my limited amount of time that I have.
I think that a lot of people understand and feel you on that one.
Yeah, but I definitely, like, I never watch TV. Like, people are always like, oh, do you watch this show, or have you seen this show? And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, the only TV I get to watch is, like, Mickey Mouse Clubhouse in the background while I'm making breakfast or something, you know? Like,
that's my life, too.
Yeah, or I can hear Impractical Jokers in the basement because my teenager's watching it, but I'm upstairs, like, doing the dishes or vacuuming or laundry or something, so I never get to watch TV, and I don't get to do a lot of things like that. But if it's, you know, sometimes I've had to realize that creativity comes from a well of finding joy in our lives. And I've gotten to the point now where I've realized I've cut so much of that out of my life that sometimes my creative well is just completely bone dry.
Yeah. Because
I haven't done anything that I used to enjoy to do that used to spark ideas for me. I never get to watch movies anymore. I never get to watch TV anymore. There's all these things I used to do that I can't anymore. And so sometimes I just, instead of writing, will actually say, this is part of my job right now that I'm going to watch a movie.
Yes.
Because I need to do something to fill my creative well because I have nothing left to give.
Yes.
So.
Definitely. I mean, everything you described about your day, you're giving, you are helping, you're caretaking, and then writing, you're giving too, right? Like something's leaving you and onto the page, and you can't do that if you have nothing left inside. So I have found too that, especially with all the kids home, and my kids are in virtual school right now, my older two, and I found, yeah, it's not great. And I found that I have to take an hour and do something for myself, or go for a walk, or like I got to lay on the couch and watch an episode of my favorite TV show. The baby was sleeping, nobody else was home, and I was like, this is the life. Like, I did not, I took this for granted before my littlest one was born. And, you definitely have to do things to fill your creative well, and not writing is still writing if it's helping you to be able to write the next day or the day after that.
And I think with COVID too, it's exacerbated it even more, because I think we're all living in this kind of, I've heard it explained as anticipatory grief. That we're living in this state of anticipatory grief because we every day brings new terrible things, right? So there's no end date to this, right? There's no this is a hard time in my life, but I know it's going to get better. It's like, we don't know what the future holds. Like, we don't know if it's just going to keep having all these problems.
Right.
And so we're just living in this constant state of flux and stress and anxiety and, sadness and all the emotions that are just so draining and exhausting. And with no end in sight and no end date that we know of, obviously there's hope for things, but you know what I mean? And so it's even harder than normal to try and find those ways to fill your creative well, because I think we're all just kind of stuck bones right now, and especially with our kids, school's changing every week, now we're in person, now we're virtual, now we're this, now we're that, and it's been really hard on my kids, and so I'm trying to help them emotionally. And so for me, what I've tried to do is get outside and get out. I live by the mountains, and so I try to make sure that I go hiking at least once a week to just get outside, get out in nature, try and feel a slice of normalcy in my life, and look at, just be out in fresh air and sunshine and the beautiful world, and be like, okay, there is still goodness in this world. That we're not just stuck in this bubble of COVID crazy. There is still something out there besides that. There is mountains, and there is sunshine, and so that's been kind of helpful for me to try and stay sane through all this, and hopefully still be able to create. So.
All right, I thank you for sharing that. I mean, I think by us talking about that, we kind of answered what my next question was, which was about, any tips for writing when, it can be so draining and stressful. And I think your point of filling your creative well and getting outside, doing something that makes you happy in any way is such a crucial part of the process. Whether, we've admitted it or not, you can't just sit and write all day. You have to do other things to get that creativity flowing, or just to refill your batteries.
Yep, definitely. And I really feel and I have playlists for my books, and so if I'm really struggling, I like to go for a walk, preferably, somewhere pretty in the mountains, but if I'm desperate, I can even just take a walk around the neighborhood with my headphones in and listening to my playlist, and just try and just let it percolate. I'm not sitting there trying to force myself to think of ideas or go through my plot, but I'm just trying to take note of the world around me, feel the sunshine on my face, feel the wind on my skin, and listen to this music that's inspiring, and just let things flow and see what comes. So
I think that's wonderful. I've never made a playlist for one of my books, but I think for the last one I wrote, I was listening to the same things over and over again, but I usually have The Office playing on my phone as I write, as good white noise.
Oh, yeah.
It's more just that. That's my soundtrack to my writing.
Yeah, that works.
Yes.
That works.
Well, Sarah, I have one final question for you. I have been told it is a super hard question, so I apologize. But I'd love to know what your favorite book is right now. This isn't your favorite book of all time, because that's a ridiculous question, but just a book you've read recently that you really loved.
It is a really super hard question. So I actually have two that I was going to talk about.
That's okay.
So in my genre, young adult fantasy, I have two of my favorites this year was Bone Crier's Moon by Catherine Purdy, which is just super unique and very atmospheric and just a really cool idea about these barriers of the dead and how she created that magic system and that whole world. And Enemies to Lovers, you always have to love that.
Oh, yes.
Which leads into my other favorite young adult fantasy I read this year, which was The Queen of Nothing by Holly Black, which also was Enemies to Lovers, and just one of my favorite series of all time so far. I mean, I just loved it so much. It was so good, and those characters were just so flawed but so amazing. And you just, I just love myself a boy that just twists in all the right ways and ends up being like amazing, like Cardin. So
yes. You have to love that.
Yeah. And then, interestingly, this summer, I've been realizing that, like, I need more of an escapist read, and where I'm trying to draft young adult fantasy, I try to read different genres when I'm writing, because I don't want to accidentally, like, steal from other people.
Yeah.
Like, subconsciously, because I'm reading their books while I'm trying to write mine. So I try to read different genres. So I actually read an adult contemporary romance called Beach Read, and I loved it so much. And it was about a girl that has writer's block, which was so perfect for me because
there you go.
I had writer's block. And ironically, so did Emily, the author who wrote the book. She was having writer's block and couldn't think of a story to write, so she decided to write a book about a writer who had writer's block. So it's like this whole very Inception-esque thing for me as an author with writer's block, reading a book from an author who had writer's block and was writing about a writer with writer's block. If you can even follow that. But it was so well written, and it was such a fun read, and it was just exactly what I needed this summer. So I loved that one.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing those. I know it's a hard question, but I love having, us share books that we love, because inevitably we miss out on books that come out because there's too many to keep track of at times.
Yeah, it's impossible.
Sarah, thank you so much for chatting with me and giving us a little bit of insight into you, your journey through the publishing world, and telling us what you could about Warriors of Wing and Flame.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been really fun.
Thank you guys so much for listening, and please make sure you go out and give Sarah some love and buy Warriors of Wing and Flame if you haven't already. It's gonna be amazing. And please make sure to rate and review this podcast where you are listening to it if you can. If you can't rate and review, could you please share about it on Twitter and Instagram and tag me and let me know what you think. My handle is @RoseQuinny, QUINNY, and there'll be another episode coming out tomorrow.